This story contains themes of identity theft, fraud, and psychological suspense. Listener discretion is advised. Imagine a world where your entire existence, every memory, every document, every single thing that proves you are you, could be systematically dismantled and replaced. Not by a hacker in a dark room, but by someone who walks among us, someone who looks like us, talks like us, and even is us. Or so it seems. What if the person staring back at you from your own driver's license suddenly wasn't you at all, but a stranger bearing your name, your birth date, your life story? For David Miller, a quiet accountant living a perfectly unremarkable life in suburban Ohio, this terrifying fantasy became a chilling reality on a Tuesday morning he would never forget. It began innocently enough with a routine check of his bank statement, a habit he'd cultivated since college. But as his eyes scanned the digital ledger, a transaction appeared that made his blood run cold. A withdrawal of $15,000, flagged as property deposit, from an account he didn't recognize, for a property he'd never seen, in a city he'd never visited. And then the name on the account. It was his, David Miller. Except it wasn't his account. It was someone else entirely, yet legally, undeniably, him. David's breath hitched in his throat. The screen flickered, reflecting the frantic pulse now thrumming behind his eyes. He clicked the link again, then again, as if repetition could somehow alter the horrifying reality staring back at him. It didn't. Every detail, every digit, every official-looking stamp screamed authenticity. Yet it was a grotesque forgery of his very existence. This wasn't identity theft in the way most people understood it. A stolen credit card, a drained bank account. This was something far more insidious, a parallel life constructed with his name, his birth date, his social security number, yet entirely separate from the life he knew. He slammed the laptop shut, the sudden darkness doing little to quell the frantic images racing through his mind. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone, his fingers fumbling over the keypad. His first call was to his bank, a faceless customer service representative who listened patiently, then politely informed him that their records showed no such additional accounts under his name. David tried to explain, to articulate the chilling sensation of seeing his identity replicated, but the representative only offered standard advice. Check his credit report, file a police report if he suspected fraud. He spent the next few hours in a dizzying spiral of phone calls. The credit bureau showed no discrepancies, no new lines of credit, no unusual activity. It was as if this duplicate identity existed in a phantom realm, invisible to the usual safeguards, yet undeniably real in the digital space he'd stumbled upon. He called the police, a non-emergency line, and was met with a weary voice that explained they couldn't investigate what appeared to be a civil matter or a potential misunderstanding until concrete financial loss or criminal activity was proven. "Mr. Miller," the officer had said, "if it's just an online profile, it might be a prank or a mistaken identity." A prank? Mistaken identity? David gripped the phone tighter, staring at his reflection in the darkened screen. He knew his identity. He knew his life. This wasn't a mistake. This was a deliberate, meticulous act of creation using him. The following morning, David woke with a leaden feeling in his stomach. The incident from the night before hadn't been a nightmare. It was a waking terror. He decided to tackle the problem head-on, to become his own investigator. The property listing, that was his best lead. A two-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood in a city 2 states away. A city David had only ever driven through on long road trips. The address was specific, the property details meticulous, even down to the virtual tour. He spent hours poring over online maps, street views, and local government websites. He found the property on the county assessor's site. The owner's name? David Miller. But the listed mailing address was not his. It was a P.O. box in the same distant city. This was no prank. This was an established identity, a life being lived, perhaps even thriving, under his name. The sheer audacity of it infuriated him, but beneath the anger, a cold dread began to set in. How deep did this go? Who was this other David Miller? And why him? He thought about his own life, a relatively unremarkable one. He was a software engineer working from home, a quiet guy with a small circle of friends. He paid his taxes, kept to himself, and had no enemies he was aware of. He wasn't rich, he wasn't famous, he wasn't involved in anything remotely controversial. Why would someone go to such elaborate lengths to steal his identity, not just for a credit card but for an entire parallel existence? He tried to search for David Miller in that distant city, but the name was common enough that the results were overwhelming. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of David Millers populated the internet. Without a more specific detail, he was lost in a digital haystack. He needed an anchor, a unique thread to pull. Then a thought struck him. The property listing he'd found was on a specific, niche real estate platform that catered to luxury rentals and sales. He remembered the site's sleek interface, its emphasis on high-end properties. He revisited the site, digging deeper. He found the agent listed for the property, Eleanor Vance, Elite Realty Group. Eleanor Vance. That was a name, a specific actionable name. He searched for her and quickly found her professional profile. She was a well-regarded agent in that city, specializing in upscale properties. He hesitated for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the call button on his phone. What would he say? "Hi, I'm David Miller, and I believe someone else named David Miller is living in a house you're selling. And he's using my identity, but it's not me." It sounded insane, paranoid. He pictured her polite confusion, the quick dismissal. He couldn't risk scaring off his only lead. He needed more information first, something concrete he could point to. He decided on a different approach. He put on his most professional voice, rehearsed a believable persona, and called Eleanor Vance's office. "Hello, this is David Miller," he began, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm calling about the property listing for address of the house. I'm interested in potentially purchasing it, but I have a few questions about the current ownership situation." Eleanor Vance herself answered, her voice crisp and professional. "Ah yes, Mr. Miller. A lovely property. What can I tell you?" David swallowed, his heart thudding. "Well, I understand the current owner is also a David Miller. I'm curious, has he owned the property for long? And what's his reason for selling?" He knew these were standard questions a potential buyer might ask, designed to elicit information about the seller's motivation and history with the property. Eleanor paused. "He's owned it for about 5 years, Mr. Miller. A very private gentleman. He's relocating for a new business venture. An excellent opportunity, I gather." 5 years. 5 years this other David Miller had been living, existing under his name, buying property, building a life. The timeline sent a shiver down David's spine. This wasn't a recent scam. This was a deep-rooted, long-term operation. "I see," David said, trying to sound nonchalant. "And does he happen to have any other properties listed with you? Or perhaps in the area?" He was pushing it, he knew, but he needed to know the extent of this phantom empire. Eleanor chuckled lightly. "Mr. Miller is quite the savvy investor. He has several properties, yes, though not all are currently on the market. He's building quite a portfolio. Several properties." David's mind reeled. This wasn't just a house. This was an empire. An empire built on his stolen identity. The scope of it was terrifying. He thanked Eleanor, promising to review the listing details again and get back to her, then hung up, his head spinning. He sat in stunned silence for a long time, the phone still clutched in his hand. This was far bigger than he could have ever imagined. Someone wasn't just using his name to open a single account. They were using it to construct an entire parallel life, a successful, financially significant life. And it had been going on for 5 years. How had it gone unnoticed? How could official systems have allowed this to happen? The questions piled up, each one heavier than the last, pressing down on him. A new, more chilling possibility began to surface. Could this other David Miller be more than just an identity thief? Could he be him? Not literally, but a mirror image, a dark doppelganger. And if this person was so successful, so well established, what would happen if the real David Miller, the original David Miller, tried to reclaim what was his? Would he be seen as the imposter? The thought sent a cold wave of fear through him. He was losing control of his own narrative, his own existence. He was no longer just a victim of abstract fraud. He was an unwitting participant in a grand deception, and he had a terrible feeling that he was about to become a very inconvenient loose end. He had to act, and he had to act carefully. His life, his very identity depended on it. He reached for his laptop again, but this time he wasn't looking for property listings. He was looking for a bus ticket. He had to go to that city. He had to see this other David Miller with his own eyes. The thought was terrifying, but he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he had no other choice. He was going to confront the ghost of himself, The decision once made felt like a physical weightlifting replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. David liquidated what little savings he had. Enough for a one-way ticket and a few days' stay. He didn't tell anyone where he was going, not his family, not his few friends. How could he? How do you explain that you're hunting down a ghost? A living phantom who has stolen your very name and existence. He felt like he was erasing himself, leaving no trace, becoming as anonymous as the identity he was pursuing. The flight was a blur of nervous energy and recycled air. Each cloud outside the window seemed to mock him, a fluffy, innocent thing obscuring the terrifying reality below. He replayed every interaction, every detail of the fraudulent accounts, searching for a clue he might have missed. He pulled up the initial bank statement that had first arrived, the one for the account he didn't open. He'd been so fixated on the name, the unfamiliar account number, the shock of it all. But now he saw it. A physical address printed neatly below the name, in a city he'd never set foot in. It was a suburban street, unremarkable, but it was a lead, a tangible starting point in this nightmare. He committed it to memory, a silent prayer that it wasn't a dead end. Landing in the unfamiliar city was disorienting. The air felt different, the sounds of traffic alien. He rented a car with a debit card, feeling a pang of irony as he used his own identity to pursue someone who had stolen it. The address led him to a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, rows of similar-looking houses, each with a manicured lawn. It was the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. He drove past the house slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was a modest two-story, painted a muted beige, with a small porch and a well-tended garden. A tricycle lay on its side in the driveway, a child's backpack slung over a porch chair. It looked normal. Too normal. This wasn't the lair of a master criminal. This was a home, and that made it all the more terrifying. Someone was living a life, his life, in plain sight. He circled the block a few more times, trying to engrave every detail into his memory. He parked his rental car a few streets away, choosing a spot that offered a view of the house without being too obvious. The waiting began. Hours crawled by. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. He watched families walk their dogs, kids ride bikes, neighbors chat over fences. Each mundane scene felt like a cruel joke, a reminder of the ordinary life that had been snatched from him. Doubt began to gnaw at him. What if he was wrong? What if this was just a coincidence? Another David Miller who happened to live at an address listed on a fraudulent account. But the sheer number of identical details, the precise timing of the identity theft, it couldn't be. The universe wasn't that cruel, was it? A car pulled into the driveway of the beige house. It was a sensible sedan, dark blue. The garage door rumbled open, swallowing the car whole. David leaned forward, his breath catching in his throat. He waited, his muscles tense, his eyes glued to the garage entrance. The door closed, and a moment later, the front door of the house opened. A man stepped out onto the porch, carrying a briefcase. He paused, adjusting his tie, then locked the door. David felt a jolt, a cold shock that rippled through his entire body. It was him. Or it wasn't him, but it was undeniably him. The man had the same receding hairline, the same slight stoop to his shoulders, the same way of running a hand through his hair when he was thoughtful. Even from this distance, David could see the familiar set of his jaw, the shape of his nose. He was dressed in a dark suit, impeccably pressed, looking like he was heading to an important meeting. He was slightly heavier than David remembered himself being a few years ago, a little more settled perhaps. But the resemblance was uncanny, chilling. It was like looking at a distorted reflection, a version of himself that had taken a different path, aged slightly differently, but was still fundamentally him. A small child, a girl with pigtails, suddenly burst out of the front door, laughing, chasing a brightly colored ball. The man on the porch smiled, a genuine, warm smile, and bent down to scoop her up, swinging her in a playful arc. He kissed her forehead, then set her down, ruffling her hair. A woman's voice called from inside the house, and the man waved, then turned and walked briskly towards the street, disappearing from view as he headed towards a bus stop or a car parked further down. David felt a primal scream building in his chest, choked off by the sheer terror and disbelief. This man, this imposter, this thief. He had a family, a child, a life, a normal life. And he had built it, or at least maintained it, on the bones of David's stolen identity. The sight of the man, so utterly ordinary, so completely at home in his stolen skin, was more horrifying than any shadowy figure in an alley. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a mix-up. This was calculated. This was deliberate. His hands trembled on the steering wheel. He felt a wave of nausea, a dizzying sense of unreality. He had come here seeking answers, seeking confirmation. He had found it, and it was far worse than he could have imagined. He wasn't just losing his credit score or his bank account. He was losing his very self. This man was living his life, or a version of it, with an ease that suggested he had been doing it for a long, long time. Who was he? How did he do it? Why David? The questions swirled, a maelstrom in his mind. He had to know. He had to understand. He had to get closer. He had to confront this ghost, this mirror image, this thief. But as he watched the empty porch, the tricycle still in the driveway, the innocent domestic scene, a new chilling thought solidified. This wasn't just about getting his identity back. This was about a man who had built an entire world on a lie that was David Miller. And David was now standing on the precipice of shattering that world, with no idea of the consequences. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything he could have conceived. He was no longer just a victim. He was a silent, dangerous witness, and he knew with a terrifying certainty that his life would never be the same. The words echoed in his mind, a monstrous, impossible truth. Michael, the real Michael, the one who worked at the diner, had just been identified by every major news outlet as a bank robber. But it wasn't him. It couldn't be. He was here, trapped in this meticulously constructed lie, while some ghost of himself was out there, tearing his life apart, piece by agonizing piece. The sheer audacity of it, the cold, calculated precision, sent a shiver of pure terror down his spine. This wasn't just a simple case of mistaken identity. It was an elaborate, terrifying masquerade, and he was the unwilling, unwitting star. He stumbled back from the television, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to scream, to call the police. But who would he call? What would he say? "Hello, officer, I'm Michael, but I'm not Michael, and the Michael you're looking for is actually me, but also not me, and I've been living in his apartment for days disguised as him without knowing why?" It was a confession, not a plea for help. He was already guilty by association, by appearance, by the very clothes on his back. His gaze swept around the unfamiliar apartment, suddenly seeing it not as a temporary refuge, but as a cage. Every object, every piece of furniture, felt like an extension of the phantom Michael's deceit. The comfortable armchair, the worn coffee table, the half-empty mug on the counter. They were all props in a play he hadn't auditioned for. He had to understand. He had to find answers not just for his own freedom but for his very survival. The man who had walked out of that bank was not him, but the world believed he was. And if the world believed it, then the people behind this elaborate charade would certainly believe it too. He was a loose end, a dangerous anomaly. He started with the most obvious place, the apartment itself. He moved methodically, his hands trembling slightly as he opened drawers, checked under cushions, and ran his fingers along shelves. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, a hidden compartment, a note, a clue to the other Michael's true identity or his motives. The place was neat, almost sterile, reflecting a careful, deliberate mind. There were no personal trinkets, no photographs of family or friends, nothing that spoke of a life truly lived. It was a shell, a stage set. In the bedroom, he found a small, locked metal box hidden beneath a pile of sweaters in the closet. His breath hitched. This had to be it. This had to be where the answers lay. He tried prying it open, but it was solid. There was no key in sight. Frustration gnawed at him. He needed access. He needed information. He remembered the laptop he'd seen on the desk in the living room. Maybe the other Michael had left something digital. He approached it cautiously, as if it might bite. It was a sleek silver model, and it powered on instantly. A password prompt appeared. He tried common combinations, his own birthday, the current date, but nothing worked. Then, on a whim, he tried the name David Miller, followed by a simple 4-digit number he'd seen written on a discarded receipt in the kitchen earlier. To his shock, the screen flickered and the desktop appeared. His heart raced. He was in. He was inside the ghost's digital world. The desktop was sparse, just a few standard icons. He navigated to the browser history, his fingers hovering over the mouse. This was it. This was where he might find the threads of the conspiracy. He scrolled through weeks of search terms, his eyes wide with disbelief. There were searches for high-security bank layouts, offshore accounts, how to create a new identity, and chillingly, face recognition software limitations. But buried deeper, among the more obvious criminal inquiries, were searches for him. His name, his old address, his social media profiles, even his diner work schedule. The other Michael hadn't just stolen his identity. He had meticulously studied him. He felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. This wasn't random. This was personal. Someone had chosen him specifically. But why? He was just a regular guy living a quiet life. He had no enemies, no hidden past. Or did he? The thought was terrifying. Then he saw it. An encrypted folder, labeled only with a series of seemingly random numbers. He knew instinctively that this was crucial. He spent an agonizing hour trying to crack it, using every password he could think of, every date, every name. Nothing. He was at a dead end again. He closed the laptop, the screen reflecting his pale, haunted face. He was trapped utterly and completely. He was Michael, but he was also David Miller, the man whose face was plastered across every news channel as a bank robber. He was a ghost in his own life, forced to inhabit the skin of a criminal. The doorbell rang, a jarring, unexpected chime that sent him leaping out of his skin. He froze, every muscle tensed. Who could it be? The police? Someone connected to the other Michael? He peered through the peephole, his breath held captive in his chest. A woman stood on the other side, holding a casserole dish. She was in her late 50s with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Hello, Michael," she called out, her voice muffled slightly by the door. "It's Emily from 3B. I saw the news. Are you all right, dear? I just wanted to bring you over some comfort food. You look so shaken." Emily, the neighbor. He remembered seeing her briefly from the window. He had to be Michael. He had to play the part. He took a deep, shaky breath, forced a smile and opened the door, trying to project an air of weary normalcy. "Emily, thank you," he said, trying to mimic the voice he'd heard on the messages. It felt unnatural, like wearing a mask that was too tight. "That's so thoughtful of you. I'm just trying to process everything." Emily's eyes were full of concern. "Of course, dear. It's just awful. I can't believe it. You're always such a quiet, polite young man. They'll catch the real culprit, I'm sure. You just keep your chin up." He nodded, taking the casserole dish, his fingers brushing hers. He felt a pang of guilt lying to this kind woman. But what choice did he have? He thanked her again, mumbled something about needing to rest, and closed the door, leaning against it, his heart pounding. She believed him. She believed he was the victim, the wrongly accused. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He was the victim, yes, but not in the way she imagined. He put the casserole on the counter, his mind racing. He needed to find the real Michael. He needed to clear his name. But how? He had no resources, no one to trust. He was alone in a city that now thought he was a criminal. He was playing a dangerous game, masquerading as a man who was already a suspect in a major crime. Every step he took, every word he uttered, could be a misstep that cost him his life. He knew he couldn't just sit there paralyzed by fear. He had to act subtly, carefully. The bank robbery. He needed details. He needed to understand the scope of what he was now entangled in. He went back to the laptop, his resolve hardening. He would become the ghost, moving silently through the other Michael's life, until he could expose the truth. He would use the other Michael's resources, his identity, against him. He opened a new browser window, his fingers hesitating for a moment before typing National Bank Robbery. City name. Date of robbery. News articles, police statements, grainy surveillance photos immediately flooded the screen. He scrolled through them, his eyes scanning for any detail, any inconsistency. He saw the composite sketch, a chillingly accurate depiction of his face. Then, buried deep in a local news report, a small paragraph caught his eye. It mentioned that the bank manager, a man named David Miller, had been unusually cooperative during the robbery, almost as if he knew the perpetrator. David Miller. The name hit him like a physical blow. The name on the fake ID. The name he was supposed to be. A cold, horrifying realization washed over him. This wasn't just about identity theft. This was far more complex. The other Michael wasn't just impersonating him. He was using his face, his identity, to frame him for a crime that seemed to have an inside man. And that inside man shared the very name he was supposed to be using. Was David Miller, the bank manager, also part of this? Or was he another victim just like Michael? The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture far more sinister than he could have imagined. He wasn't just a scapegoat. He was a pawn in a much larger, more dangerous game. A game where the lines between identities were blurred, and everyone seemed to have a hidden role. He was caught in a web of deceit, spun by a master manipulator, and he was quickly realizing that the threads of this web were tightening around him, threatening to choke off his very existence. He had to find out who David Miller, the bank manager, really was. He had to unmask the true architect of this nightmare, and he had to do it before the real Michael, or the people pulling his strings, came looking for him. Michael knew he couldn't go to the authorities. Not yet. Every piece of evidence pointed to him as the imposter, the criminal. He was trapped in a web of someone else's making, and the only way out was to unravel it himself. His first target, David Miller, the man who held the keys to his new unwanted identity. He started with the obvious and old-fashioned internet deep dive. He scoured public records databases, social media platforms, professional networking sites. He searched for David Miller, the bank manager, the man he had met, the man whose face was burned into his memory. What he found, or rather what he didn't find, was chilling. The David Miller he knew, the one with the impeccably tailored suits and the calm, assured demeanor, appeared to be a digital ghost. There was a David Miller from Ohio, a David Miller from California, a dozen David Millers across the country, but none matched the specific details he remembered: the bank, the city, the subtle nuances of his professional profile. It was as if someone had meticulously scrubbed away any trace of the man before he ever stepped into Michael's life. This wasn't just a lack of online presence, it was a deliberate absence. A vacuum. It spoke volumes. This David Miller wasn't just discreet. He was hidden. This wasn't his real name, or at least not his real identity. The realization sent a fresh wave of dread through Michael. He wasn't dealing with a simple con artist. He was up against a professional, someone with resources and a chilling attention to detail. He tried another angle. He thought back to their brief interactions. David Miller had been smooth, almost too smooth. He had mentioned a few things in passing, small talk designed to build rapport. A casual comment about a favorite coffee shop near the bank, a fleeting reference to a former colleague, a brief anecdote about a challenging case he'd worked on years ago. These were breadcrumbs, tiny fragments of a fabricated life, but perhaps, just perhaps, one of them wasn't entirely fabricated. Michael focused on the coffee shop. It was a long shot, a desperate one, but what else did he have? He couldn't risk going back to the bank, not now. He needed to observe, to gather intelligence without revealing himself. He found the coffee shop David had mentioned, a trendy, independent place just a few blocks from the First National branch. For 3 mornings in a row, Michael staked out the place, nursing lukewarm coffee, his eyes scanning every face, every movement. He felt like a character in a spy novel, a reluctant one, thrust into a world of shadows he never asked for. On the 4th morning, just as he was about to give up, he saw him, David Miller, unmistakable, walking out of the coffee shop, a steaming cup in hand. But he wasn't alone. He was deep in conversation with another man, a man Michael didn't recognize. This man was older, perhaps in his late 50s, with a stern, almost academic look, spectacles perched on his nose, and a neatly trimmed gray beard. He carried a worn leather briefcase, looking every bit the seasoned professional. They walked a few paces, then stopped on the corner, continuing their hushed discussion. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it, a direct link. He paid his bill, trying to appear nonchalant, and followed them from a safe distance, blending into the morning rush. They walked for several blocks, their conversation seemingly intense, punctuated by gestures and occasional glances at the older man's briefcase. They finally stopped in front of a nondescript office building, one that didn't bear any obvious signage beyond a small, brass plaque near the entrance. Sterling and Associates, Financial Consulting. Sterling and Associates. The name felt significant, though Michael couldn't place why. He watched as David Miller and the older man entered the building. He waited for a full hour, pacing nervously, before deciding on his next move. He couldn't go in there. Not without a plan, not without knowing what he was walking into. This wasn't just a casual meeting. This felt like business, serious business. He needed to find out who the older man was. He remembered the briefcase, the professional demeanor. He pulled out his phone, discreetly snapping a photo of the building's entrance, making sure to capture the brass plaque. He then did a quick online search for Sterling and Associates Financial Consulting. The results were sparse, a bare-bones website with a generic mission statement and no listed personnel. Red flag number 2. A legitimate financial consulting firm usually prided itself on transparency and showcasing its team. This felt intentionally vague. Michael then searched for the name of the firm combined with David Miller. Nothing. No cross-reference, no shared history. It was a dead end, or so it seemed. But then he remembered something David Miller had said in their initial meeting, a throwaway line about his mentor in the financial world, someone who had taught him the ropes. Could this older man be the mentor? He decided to go back to the coffee shop. He approached the barista, a friendly young woman with bright blue hair. "Excuse me," Michael began, trying to sound casual. "I was here earlier, and I think I saw a friend of mine, David Miller." He was with an older gentleman, gray beard, glasses, carrying a leather briefcase. "Do you happen to know them? They seem to be regulars." The barista smiled. "Oh, you mean Mr. Miller and Mr. Harrison? Yes, they're in almost every Tuesday and Thursday morning. Always get the same thing, black coffee for Mr. Miller, and a double espresso for Mr. Harrison. They always seem to have very serious conversations." Mr. Harrison. The name echoed in Michael's mind. He thanked the barista, his mind racing. Mr. Harrison. That was the missing piece. He now had a name, a real name, connected to David Miller. He immediately went to a quiet corner of the coffee shop, pulled out his phone, and searched for Mr. Harrison, Sterling and Associates. The results were instantaneous and far more substantial than anything he'd found for David Miller. Arthur Harrison. A quick search revealed a detailed professional profile. Arthur Harrison was a highly respected, albeit somewhat reclusive, financial consultant with a long history in high-stakes corporate mergers and acquisitions. He had operated Sterling and Associates for decades, known for his discretion and his ability to navigate complex, often opaque financial waters. He had a reputation for being ruthless but effective, but there was something else. A small, almost hidden detail buried deep in an archived Business Journal article from nearly 15 years ago. An article detailing a major corporate scandal involving a shell corporation and significant offshore transfers. Arthur Harrison had been tangentially involved, cited as a consultant who had provided strategic advice to one of the parties. He was never charged, always maintaining his innocence, but the article hinted at a shadowy network, a group that specialized in creating untraceable financial pathways for clients who preferred to operate outside the conventional system. Michael felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Untraceable financial pathways. Shell corporations. This wasn't just about identity theft. This was about something far bigger, far more sophisticated. David Miller wasn't just an imposter. He was a pawn, or perhaps a key player, in a much larger operation, an operation that Arthur Harrison, the mentor, seemed to orchestrate. He looked at the photo he'd taken of Sterling and Associates, then at the details of Arthur Harrison's past. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a terrifying mosaic. His new identity, the millions of dollars in the account, the sudden disappearance of the real Michael, it all pointed to a meticulously planned high-level scheme. They hadn't just stolen his identity. They had fabricated a new one, complete with a carefully constructed financial history, to facilitate something much grander. Michael realized with a jolt that he wasn't just trying to clear his name anymore. He was stumbling into the heart of a sophisticated criminal enterprise, one that specialized in creating phantom lives and phantom fortunes. He was no longer just a victim. He was an accidental witness, a loose end. And loose ends in this world tended to be tied up permanently. He had to assume they knew he was alive, that he was out there questioning things. He had to assume they were already looking for him. The game had changed. He wasn't just trying to survive. He was trying to expose them before they erased him for good. He needed to get closer to Harrison to understand the full scope of their operation. But how? And what would he find when he did? The thought alone sent a shiver down his spine. He knew he was playing with fire, but he had no other choice. His life, his very existence depended on it. His life, his very existence depended on it. Michael's mind raced, a frantic kaleidoscope of possibilities, each more dangerous than the last. He needed an edge, a way to peer behind the curtain without becoming another casualty. The police were a dead end. His own resources were depleted. There was only one person he knew who possessed the kind of obscure, digital prowess required for such an impossible task. A ghost from his past, a brilliant erratic hacker named Alex Chun. Alex was a legend in certain circles, a digital phantom who could navigate the deepest, darkest corners of the internet with an almost supernatural intuition. Michael had worked with him briefly years ago on a secure network project, and even then, Alex's methods bordered on the unorthodox, his understanding of code more akin to a sixth sense than learned skill. Reaching out to Alex was a monumental risk. Alex operated in the shadows, and any contact with him could draw unwanted attention. But Michael was out of choices. Desperation was a powerful motivator. He dug out an old prepaid burner phone he kept hidden away, a relic from a more paranoid phase of his life. He activated it, connecting to a public Wi-Fi network far from his current safe house, layering encryption upon encryption, using every trick he knew to obscure his digital footprint. He crafted a cryptic message, a series of numbers and an old, shared code phrase only Alex would recognize. It was a Hail Mary pass into the digital void. He sent it, then immediately destroyed the phone, snapping it in half and scattering its components in different trash bins across the city. He wouldn't wait for a reply. If Alex was still out there, if he was willing, he would know how to respond. 2 days later, a message appeared on a secure, anonymous email account Michael had set up years ago and rarely used. It was a single untraceable image, a blurry photo of a specific coffee shop in a bustling downtown district, with a date and time subtly embedded in the image's metadata. Alex was in. The meeting was a tense affair. Michael arrived early, blending into the crowd, observing. Alex was there, exactly as Michael remembered him, lean, sharp-eyed, with an air of restless intelligence that seemed to crackle around him. He wore a nondescript hoodie, his face partially obscured by the brim, constantly scanning the room. He looked like a man perpetually on the edge of flight. "Michael," Alex greeted, his voice low, a hint of surprise in his tone as Michael slid into the booth opposite him. "Didn't think I'd ever hear from you again. And certainly not like this." His gaze was piercing, analytical. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Or became one." Michael leaned forward, keeping his voice equally hushed. "Worse, Alex. I am a ghost. My life, my identity, it's gone. Stolen. Replaced." Alex raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He took a slow sip of his lukewarm coffee. "Stolen? Replaced? That's quite a story, Michael. Who would bother with that? Identity theft is usually about credit cards, bank accounts, not an entire life. This is an ordinary identity theft, Alex. It's bigger, more sophisticated. My entire past, my records, my social security number, even my birth certificate, it all points to someone else. Someone named Michael Thorne. And I'm just gone." Michael explained the core of his predicament, the inexplicable disappearance of his own identity, the existence of this other Michael Thorne who was living his life. He watched Alex for any sign of disbelief, but Alex just listened, his expression neutral, his mind clearly working through the implications. "Okay," Alex finally said, a slow nod. "That's extreme. And technically, fiendishly difficult to pull off without leaving a trace. So what do you want from me?" "I need you to find the trace," Michael urged. "This Michael Thorne, the fake one. He exists. He has a digital footprint. I need you to go deeper than any official search. I need you to look for the anomalies, the cracks in the facade. Anything that suggests he's not who he seems, or that his identity was constructed." Alex considered this, a faint smirk playing on his lips. A digital archaeological dig into a fabricated life? Intriguing. Expensive. "Name your price," Michael said without hesitation. "I don't have much liquid cash, but I have other assets. And my life depends on this, Alex. My real life." Alex held up a hand. No, not like that. This sounds challenging, and frankly a little thrilling. But I need more than just a name. Give me everything you know about this Michael Thorne. Every detail, every inconsistency you've noticed, no matter how small." Michael spent the next hour recounting every detail, from the bank account anomaly to the driver's license, the apartment, the job. Alex absorbed it all, occasionally scribbling notes on a small, encrypted tablet. He then laid out his plan. He wouldn't just look for discrepancies in public records, but would delve into the deep web, social media archives, metadata trails, darknet forums, places where even the most carefully constructed identities often left faint, telltale echoes. Days turned into a week. Michael waited, holed up in his anonymous apartment, the silence amplifying his anxiety. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every distant siren a harbinger of discovery. Then, another encrypted message from Alex. A single word. Found something. Urgent. They met again, this time in a deserted park at dusk. Alex didn't waste time with pleasantries. His usual detached demeanor was replaced by a grim intensity. You were right, Michael. This isn't just about your stolen identity. It's about an entire assembly line of them. Michael's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? The Michael Thorne identity is a masterpiece of digital fabrication, Alex explained, his voice hushed. Perfectly constructed, meticulously detailed. But it's not unique. I found dozens, Michael. Dozens of similar, fully fleshed out digital lives, all seemingly dormant, waiting to be activated. They're all connected by a peculiar digital signature, almost like a serial number embedded in their metadata. It's a string of alphanumeric characters, completely random at first glance, but it's consistent across every single one of these dormant identities. He showed Michael a blurred image on his tablet, a long, complex string of characters. This isn't a random error. It's an internal tag, a way for them to track their products. Products? Michael whispered, the word chilling him to the bone. Yes, these aren't just stolen identities, Michael. They're fabricated identities, built from scratch, using harvested data, then kept in cold storage until a client needs a new life. Your Michael Thorne was simply one of their activated units. They took your life, your past, and essentially cloned it, then assigned it to someone else. And they have an entire inventory waiting. The scale of the operation was staggering, terrifying. Michael felt a wave of nausea. He wasn't just a victim. He was a data point in a vast clandestine enterprise. I managed to trace that alphanumeric tag, Alex continued, his eyes narrowed. It led me to a heavily encrypted dark web forum. Invitation only. Extremely secure. I couldn't get in fully, but I got a glimpse. It's a marketplace, Michael. Not for drugs or weapons, but for new lives. For complete, verifiable, untraceable identities. What was it called? Michael asked, his voice barely a tremor. Alex paused, his gaze meeting Michael's. I only saw the header for a second before their defenses bounced me. It was a project name. Very fitting, actually, given what they do. He took a deep breath. It's called the Phoenix Project. The Phoenix Project. The name resonated with a chilling finality. Rebirth. Reinvention. But for Michael, it meant his identity wasn't just stolen, it was repurposed, a template for countless others. He was facing an organization that didn't just erase but created. And Alex's attempt to access their forum, however brief, wouldn't have gone unnoticed. They had just pinged the radar of an entity that could make entire lives vanish. Michael knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he and Alex were now inextricably linked to this shadowy organization, and they were very much on the Phoenix Project's radar. The game had just changed, and the stakes had never been higher. The chilling realization hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Michael and Alex stared at each other, the vibrant energy of the coffee shop around them suddenly feeling distant, surreal. The world had shifted on its axis, and they were no longer just curious investigators. They were targets. The Phoenix Project. The name was a phantom limb, a painful presence they couldn't see but could feel, a weight settling heavy on their shoulders. Michael, Alex whispered, her voice barely audible above the clatter of cups and murmurs of conversation. What do we do? His mind raced, a whirlwind of fear and adrenaline. The sheer audacity of the message, the precision with which it had been delivered, spoke volumes about the organization they were up against. They weren't dealing with a simple identity theft ring or a local fraud operation. This was something far more sophisticated, far more dangerous. We can't go to the police, Michael stated, the words tasting bitter. Not yet. If this Phoenix Project can plant a message like that, track us, compromise identities, who's to say they haven't compromised the authorities too? Or that telling the police wouldn't just put us in more danger, expose us to more scrutiny from them? Alex nodded slowly, her eyes wide with apprehension. So we're on our own? For now, Michael confirmed. But we're not helpless. We have the phone. We have the message. And we have each other." He tried to project a confidence he didn't entirely feel, for Alex's sake as much as his own. "First we disappear. Digitally, at least." They left the coffee shop, moving with a heightened awareness of their surroundings. Every glance felt like a surveillance probe, every passing car a potential tail. They walked for blocks, taking circuitous routes, before ducking into a nondescript electronics store. Inside, they bought 2 prepaid burner phones paid for in cash. Their old phones were powered down, their SIM cards removed, and then each phone was meticulously wrapped in aluminum foil, a crude Faraday cage to block any potential signals or tracking. They would deposit them in separate, distant public trash cans later just to be sure. Back in Michael's apartment, which now felt less like a sanctuary and more like a potential trap, they began to strategize. The internet was their enemy and their only hope. The Phoenix Project, Alex typed into a search engine on Michael's laptop, which was disconnected from his usual network and running through a VPN. The results were a frustrating mix. A defunct humanitarian aid initiative, a venture capital firm that had rebranded years ago, a series of self-help seminars. Nothing that screamed, shadowy organization tracking people through compromised identities. It was a digital ghost or perhaps a master of misdirection. "They're good," Michael muttered, leaning back, rubbing his temples. "Too good. They've either scrubbed their online presence clean, or they never had one to begin with, or the name itself is a highly effective smokescreen." "What about the phone itself?" Alex suggested, picking up the ancient flip phone with a pair of latex gloves. "It's old, but it delivered a highly advanced message. There has to be something unique about it." They spent the next few hours meticulously examining the device. They couldn't find any obvious modifications or hidden compartments. It looked like any other relic from the early 2000s. The message, however, was still there, glowing ominously on the tiny screen. "It's not just the message," Michael realized, a new thought sparking. "It's how the message got there. It wasn't an SMS. It was embedded, part of the phone's core system, almost like a piece of its original programming. And it only revealed itself when I tried to reactivate it." This level of technical sophistication was beyond them. They needed an expert, someone who operated outside the conventional lines, someone who understood the dark corners of the digital world. Michael thought of David. David Miller was an old acquaintance from Michael's less-than-stellar college days. David had been a brilliant, albeit rebellious, computer science major, notorious for his ethical hacking exploits. After a close call with the law, David had cleaned up his act, at least publicly, and now ran a successful, discreet digital security consultancy. He specialized in unconventional problems, often for clients who preferred to keep their dealings private. He was expensive, paranoid, and utterly trustworthy once you earned his respect. "I know a guy," Michael told Alex, his voice low, "but he's complicated, and we'll have to be extremely careful how we approach him." They arranged a meeting for the following day, using their burner phones and an encrypted messaging app. The location was a secluded, out-of-the-way diner known for its terrible coffee and lack of surveillance cameras. Michael and Alex arrived separately, taking different routes, constantly checking their rearview mirrors and scanning their surroundings. David was already there, hunched over a lukewarm cup of coffee, his eyes sharp and intelligent, darting around the room. He was a man who lived in a permanent state of heightened vigilance. He greeted Michael with a curt nod, a subtle acknowledgement of their shared past. Alex he eyed with a professional curiosity. "Michael," David said, his voice a low rumble, "you look like you've seen a ghost. Or worse, a server farm in Siberia." Michael placed the old flip phone, still in its gloved hand, on the table between them. He explained, carefully omitting details that might compromise Alex or himself more than necessary, about the initial investigation into Jessica, the apartment, the hidden compartment, and finally, the discovery of the phone and its cryptic message. He watched David's face as he spoke, searching for any flicker of recognition, any sign that he knew the name the Phoenix Project. There was none, only an increasing intensity in David's gaze. "So you're telling me," David summarized, picking up the phone with his own gloved hand, turning it over, "that this ancient piece of tech delivered a self-activating, embedded message warning you that your identity is compromised, and it came from an organization called the Phoenix Project, which seems to exist only in whispers and dead-end searches?" "Precisely," Alex confirmed, her voice steady despite the tension. David held the phone up to the light, his brow furrowed in concentration. And you want me to tell you what this thing is, and what the Phoenix Project might be? And if we're truly on their radar now, Michael added, because that message felt less like a warning and more like a declaration. David leaned back, a thoughtful expression on his face. This isn't a simple hack, Michael. This is elegant, disturbing, a message embedded at the firmware level, dormant until specific conditions are met, then triggered to alert the recipient and presumably the sender. It's like a digital tripwire. He pulled a small specialized device from his bag, a handheld forensic analyzer, and connected it to the phone. His fingers flew across the tiny keyboard, lines of code scrolling rapidly across the device's screen. Silence hung heavy, broken only by the hum of the diner's ventilation system and the occasional clatter of dishes. Michael and Alex watched David, their hopes tethered to his expertise. After what felt like an eternity, David grunted. "Well, this is interesting," he murmured, his eyes still glued to the screen. The phone's original operating system has been heavily modified, almost entirely rebuilt, actually. It's a bespoke OS designed for one purpose: to function as a highly secure, undetectable data relay and surveillance device. Michael felt a cold dread creep up his spine. Surveillance. Yes, David confirmed. The message wasn't just a message. It was a trigger. The moment you powered it on and accessed that specific sequence, it activated. It broadcast a signal like a silent beacon, confirming its activation and, I'd wager, its current location and the fact that its intended recipient had found it. So they wanted us to find it, Alex breathed, the implication settling heavily. They wanted us to activate it. Exactly, David said, his gaze fixed on them. This wasn't a warning, Michael. It was a confirmation of contact. You just officially signed yourself up for something very, very big. And very, very dangerous. He paused, then delivered the final crushing blow. And based on the sophistication of this tech, I'd say they've already compromised your digital lives. Your old phones, your computers, your networks. Assume it's all compromised. They've been watching you since the moment that beacon went live. Possibly even before. The words hit them like a physical blow. They weren't just on the Phoenix Project's radar. They were already in their crosshairs. The game hadn't just changed. They had walked right into the arena, blindfolded, and the hunting season had just begun. The words hit them like a physical blow. They weren't just on the Phoenix Project's radar. They were already in their crosshairs. The game hadn't just changed. They had walked right into the arena, blindfolded, and the hunting season had just begun. A cold dread seeped into the small windowless room, chilling them far more than the failing air conditioning. Michael, usually so composed, felt a tremor run through him. Jessica's eyes, wide with alarm, darted to the array of monitors, as if expecting to see a digital manifestation of their hunters emerge from the code. David, the most outwardly stoic, clenched his jaw, his hand instinctively going to the empty holster at his side, a phantom weight he now desperately wished was real. "How?" Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. "How do they know we're here? We've been so careful." Michael shook his head, his mind racing, trying to process the impossible. Careful isn't enough when you're dealing with something like this. They didn't just find us, they anticipated us. They laid a trap, and we walked into it the moment we started digging into the original identities. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging the room into momentary darkness before sputtering back to life. It was a subtle thing, easily dismissed as a grid hiccup in the old building, but in that moment it felt like a deliberate message. A warning. "That's not a coincidence," David growled, his eyes scanning the reinforced door, the walls. "They're testing us, probing our defenses." Jessica's fingers flew across her keyboard, her usual speed now infused with a frantic urgency. "My firewall logs show a series of rapid, high-level probes just now. Not brute force, not a denial of service. It's surgical, like they're mapping our network infrastructure, looking for weaknesses." "They're not just looking, Jessica," Michael corrected, a grim realization dawning on him. "They're already inside." That message, that warning, it wasn't a discovery. It was an acknowledgement. They let us know they were there because they wanted us to know. They want us to react. The implications were terrifying. If the Phoenix Project could breach their digital fortress, what else could they do? What physical measures had they already taken? Was the very air they breathed being monitored? "We need to move," David stated, his voice firm, cutting through the rising panic. "Now. This place is compromised. Where do we go?" Jessica asked, looking up from her screens, her face pale. "Every safe house we have, every network, every contingency plan. If they're this advanced, they could know them all." Michael stared at the flickering monitors, a sudden desperate idea forming. "They want us to react, right? To flee, to scatter. What if we don't? What if we use their own tactics against them?" David scoffed. "And do what, Michael? Invite them for coffee? We're outgunned, outmaneuvered, and apparently already surrounded." "Not surrounded, David. Observed," Michael corrected, his eyes narrowing. "There's a difference. They haven't made a direct move yet. They're playing a psychological game. They want to break us to make us make a mistake. But what if their observation is also their weakness?" Jessica, ever the pragmatist, leaned forward. "Explain. What are you thinking?" "They sent us a message, a digital taunt," Michael began, his voice gaining a determined edge. "But how did they get it to us? They breached our secure channel, yes, but the content of the message implies a deep understanding of our investigation. They know we're looking into the original identities. That means they're tracking our research, our progress. Which means they have a mole, or they've been listening to everything we've said since day one," David concluded, running a hand through his hair. "Great. Just great. Or," Michael continued, ignoring David's exasperation, "they have an unparalleled data intercept capability. They're not just tracking us, they're tracking information. And if they're tracking information, they're part of a larger network processing vast amounts of data. And that, Jessica, leaves a footprint." Jessica's eyes lit up with a flicker of understanding. "You think we can trace their tracking? Use their own surveillance against them?" "It's our only play," Michael affirmed. "They've shown their hand, albeit subtly. They want us to panic and run. We do the opposite. We stand our ground, but we don't engage directly. We use this moment of perceived vulnerability to bait them, to draw them out, and in doing so, force them to reveal more of themselves." "It's risky, Michael," Jessica warned. "Extremely risky. If they're as good as we suspect, they'll anticipate any countermove." "They'll anticipate a defensive countermove," Michael countered. "They won't anticipate an offensive one, not when they believe they have us cornered. We give them what they expect, a scramble, a desperate attempt to shore up defenses, but beneath that we launch our own offensive." David remained skeptical. "And what does this offensive look like? A digital ghost hunt? While they're potentially kicking down our door?" "We don't know where their physical presence is, David," Michael said, his gaze fixed on Jessica. "But we know where their digital presence is. That message came from somewhere. It had to originate from a server, a network, a specific IP address, however cloaked. They didn't just conjure it from thin air. They left a trace, however faint." Jessica nodded, her fingers already dancing across the keyboard again. "If they're processing that much information, they'd need immense computational power. Distributed networks, perhaps. Cloud-based servers, possibly even dark web infrastructure. It's like finding a needle in a haystack, but if they're actively watching us, if they're feeding us information like that message, then there's a live connection, a pipeline." "Exactly," Michael confirmed. "They're not just a static entity. They're an active, breathing network. And active networks have vulnerabilities. Our goal isn't to take them down right now. It's to find their source, to locate the brain of the Phoenix Project, or at least one of its primary nodes." The floorboards above them creaked. All three froze, their heads snapping upwards. It was an old building, prone to settling noises, but in their heightened state, every sound was amplified, every shadow a potential threat. "Just the building," David murmured, but his hand was now resting on a heavy wrench he'd pulled from under the desk. Jessica, however, had gone rigid. "Wait," she whispered, her eyes glued to one of her monitors. A new window had popped up, not from her system, but seemingly external, overriding her current work. It was a live feed. The image was grainy, distorted by static, but unmistakably a view of the street outside their building. A dark sedan was parked directly across the street, its windows tinted, impossible to see inside. But then, a subtle movement in the passenger window, a glint of light. "They're watching us right now," David breathed, his knuckles white around the wrench. The feed flickered and a single line of text appeared, stark white against the dark image. "Asterisk, we know your next move. What will it be?" Asterisk. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge, a chilling confirmation that their every thought, every whispered plan was being monitored. The Phoenix Project wasn't just aware of their investigation. They were orchestrating their reactions. They were playing a game, and Michael, Jessica, and David were the unwitting pawns. "They're not just inside our network," Jessica gasped, her voice trembling. "They're inside our heads. They're predicting us." Michael felt a surge of cold fury, quickly followed by a strange, unsettling calm. This wasn't just about finding answers anymore. This was a war of wills, a battle for their very minds. They wanted them to panic, to run, to reveal their next move. But what if they didn't have a next move? What if their next move was to accept the challenge, to dive headfirst into the abyss they now knew was watching them? He looked at David, then at Jessica. "They want to know our next move? Fine, we'll show them, but it won't be the one they expect." The dark sedan outside remained motionless, a silent predator waiting. The message on the screen pulsed, taunting them. The air in the room grew heavy, thick with unspoken fear and a desperate resolve. They were no longer just investigators, they were targets. And the hunt had just intensified, becoming a deadly dance where their every step was known, and every choice could be their last. The question wasn't if they would escape the Phoenix Project's grasp, but if they could even conceive of a move that the Phoenix Project hadn't already predicted. The air in the cramped, rented room was thick with the dust of desperation. Every shadow seemed to hold a watching eye, every whisper of wind a recorded message. Michael paced, a phantom weight on his shoulders, the ghost of David's murder, the crushing reality of their entrapment. Emily sat hunched over a laptop, its screen a mosaic of encrypted files, all leading to the same dead end, the Phoenix Project. They had been played, outmaneuvered at every turn. Their secure communications had been compromised, their escape routes anticipated, their very thoughts seemingly broadcast to an unseen enemy. The digital world, once their weapon, had become a cage. Michael raked a hand through his hair, the frustration a bitter taste in his mouth. "It's over, Emily," he rasped, the words heavy with defeat. "There's no move left. They know everything. They've got us." Emily didn't look up immediately, her fingers still hovering over the keyboard. But then slowly she closed the laptop. The click echoed in the silence. Her gaze met his, not with surrender, but with a flicker of something new. A spark of defiance born from the ashes of their despair. "No," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "They know everything we do, every move we make that they expect. But what if we do something they can't predict? Something completely illogical from their perspective?" Michael scoffed, a humorless sound. "Like what? Walk into the nearest police station and confess to a murder I didn't commit, just to throw them off?" "No," Emily insisted, standing and walking to the small table where David's scattered notes lay. "Like going back to the beginning. We've been trying to outsmart an AI, Michael. A network of algorithms designed to predict human behavior. But what if the flaw isn't in their prediction model, but in the data they rely on? What if we're looking for a digital solution to a human problem?" She picked up a worn leather-bound journal, one of David's oldest possessions, filled with scribbled thoughts and diagrams that looked like ancient runes. David didn't just understand the system, he understood the people behind it. Or, more importantly, the person who built it. Michael stared at the journal. He'd flipped through it countless times, dismissing most of it as esoteric ramblings or early conceptual designs that never made it into the Phoenix Project's current iteration. "What are you talking about? Think about it," Emily urged, her eyes alight with a nascent theory. "Every grand system has an architect, someone who lays the foundation, who understands its core principles, and who might have, intentionally or not, built in a failsafe." David was obsessed with the origins of the Phoenix Project, not just its current operations but its genesis. He believed it was corrupted, twisted from its original purpose. She tapped a page in the journal, filled with complex mathematical formulas and a name circled repeatedly. Thorne. Michael leaned closer, the name stirring a faint memory. Thorne. David mentioned him once. A genius, he called him. Obsessed with digital identity, privacy, security. Before it all went sideways. "Exactly," Emily confirmed, tracing the name with her finger. "Dr. Elias Thorne, the man who, almost 2 decades ago, conceived of something called Project Nightingale, a revolutionary system designed to create ironclad digital identities, impenetrable to theft, for individuals whose lives depended on absolute anonymity. Think high-level whistleblowers, witnesses in critical cases, people needing complete digital invisibility. Michael's brow furrowed. So, the Phoenix Project, it's a perversion of Thorne's original idea? Worse, Emily corrected, her voice dropping to a near whisper. It's Project Nightingale weaponized. Thorne's vision was pure, a shield against the digital chaos. But someone or some group saw its potential for control, for profit, for creating entirely new lives, not just protecting existing ones. David believed Thorne himself disappeared when he realized what his creation was becoming. He vanished without a trace, almost as if he'd been scrubbed from existence. The official story was a tragic accident, a hiking mishap in the Rockies. A cold dread settled over Michael. So, if Thorne built Nightingale and Nightingale became the Phoenix Project, then he might know how to shut it down. A master key, a backdoor. Or, Emily added, her gaze sharpening, he might be the only one who truly understands its fundamental vulnerabilities. The Phoenix Project is designed to be seamless, to leave no trace. But every system, no matter how advanced, has a point of origin, a creator who knew its every secret. David's notes here, she gestured to the journal, they aren't just about the current operations. They're a historical deep dive. He suspected Thorne built in a kill switch, a failsafe in case his creation ever fell into the wrong hands, a kind of digital deadman switch for the entire system. The revelation was a jolt of pure adrenaline. It wasn't about outrunning the Phoenix Project, or even outsmarting its algorithms. It was about finding its Achilles heel, its single point of failure, hidden within its very genesis. But where do we find a ghost? Michael asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. If the Phoenix Project could make him disappear, they certainly won't want us finding him. That's the unpredictable move, Emily said, her eyes fixed on Michael. The Phoenix Project tracks digital footprints. It monitors networks, financial transactions, communications. But what if Thorne went completely off-grid? Not just offline, but off the map. David's research suggested Thorne was a man of extreme habits, a recluse even before his disappearance. He had a fascination with remote, isolated locations, places where the digital world simply doesn't exist. She flipped a few more pages in David's journal, pointing to a series of coordinates and a cryptic phrase. The Silent Sentinel watches over the forgotten code. The Silent Sentinel, Michael repeated, his mind racing. It sounds like a place. A physical place, not a server farm. Exactly, Emily confirmed. And these coordinates, they point to a remote, abandoned observatory in the Nevada desert. A place Thorne used to frequent in his early research days, long before Project Nightingale became a reality. It's a forgotten place, a blind spot for even the Phoenix Project's ubiquitous surveillance. No cell towers, no internet access, just miles of empty desert. A dangerous, exhilarating hope surged through Michael. This wasn't about running anymore, it was about hunting. So our only shot is to find Thorne, activate this kill switch, and bring down the Phoenix Project from the inside out. It's our only shot, Emily agreed, her voice firm. But it's also the most dangerous. If the Phoenix Project senses we're getting close to Thorne, they'll unleash everything they have. This isn't just about escaping their grasp anymore. This is about dismantling their entire operation. And to do that, we have to make a move so audacious, so far outside their predictive models, that they won't see it coming until it's too late. The quiet room, once suffocating, now crackled with a new kind of tension. The despair had lifted, replaced by a desperate, defiant resolve. They had a target, a direction, and a faint glimmer of hope. But the path to the Silent Sentinel, to Dr. Elias Thorne, was a perilous one, stretching across miles of unforgiving desert and through the shadow of an enemy that had proven itself to be everywhere, all-knowing. They were about to step into the ultimate unknown, gambling everything on the slim chance that a forgotten genius held the key to their salvation, and the downfall of a global conspiracy. This was no longer a deadly dance where their every step was known. This was a Hail Mary, a last-ditch effort to break free, or die trying in the heart of the desert. The blistering desert wind whipped around them, a promise of the brutal gauntlet ahead. Emily, her face grim but resolute, pulled a small ruggedized tablet from her backpack. "They'll be sweeping the main roads, the air above us, everything," she stated, her voice tight but clear over the wind's howl. "Our only chance is to go where they don't expect us to go, where their tech is weakest." Michael peered over her shoulder at the holographic map flickering on the tablet screen. It showed a labyrinth of canyons, ancient dry riverbeds, and vast, desolate stretches of sand, overlaid with what looked like complex atmospheric and satellite data. "What do you mean weakest?" he asked, his eyes scanning the terrain. "Blind spots," Sarah interjected, her gaze fixed on Emily, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Right." Emily nodded, a grim smile touching her lips. "Exactly. Not just satellite blind spots, which are rare but predictive blind spots. They track patterns, anomalies. If we move in a way that's completely illogical to their algorithms, we become noise. And the desert itself, this specific stretch, has natural electromagnetic interference due to mineral deposits. It's a ghost in the machine." She pointed to a winding, jagged line on the map. "We go through Dead Man's Gulch. It's a 30-mile trek on foot, mostly at night. It will take us 2 days, maybe 3 if we're careful. At the end, there's an old, abandoned seismology station. It's off-grid, no official records, just a forgotten relic. If we can get there, I can get us a secure link out and access to a cache of resources I prepared years ago for something like this." Michael's jaw tightened. 30 miles on foot, through a canyon in the desert, with them breathing down our necks. "It's our only play, Michael," Sarah said, her voice firm. "We either take it, or we wait for them to roll up." He looked at Sarah, then at Emily, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. "All right," he said, pulling his backpack tighter. "Lead the way, genius." They ditched the rental car, wiping it clean of prints, and stripped it of anything useful: water bottles, a first aid kit, a forgotten roadside map. Emily kept her tablet carefully shielded, its low glow the only light they dared to use as they plunged into the mouth of Dead Man's Gulch just as twilight bled into a moonless night. The air immediately grew colder, the canyon walls rising like silent sentinels, swallowing the last vestiges of the setting sun. Above them, unseen by human eyes, the syndicate's surveillance network was already in full swing. Drones, thermal cameras, ground patrols, a vast coordinated net was tightening around the area where Michael and Sarah had last been tracked. But as the hours passed and their initial sweep yielded nothing, a cold frustration began to settle over Victor, the syndicate's chief enforcer. "They just vanished?" Victor barked into his secure comms, his voice laced with venom. He was pacing a sterile command center hundreds of miles away. A massive holographic map of the desert spread before him. Red dots, representing his teams, crisscrossed the terrain, but the green blips, representing their targets, were gone. They didn't just disappear into thin air. "Agent Miller." "Find them." "Sir, their last known vehicle was found abandoned at the entrance to Dead Man's Gulch," a nervous voice reported. "But our thermal scans show no human signatures for miles in any direction. The geological data for that area indicates high mineral content, causing significant interference with long-range thermal and EM scans." Victor slammed his fist on a console. "Interference? You're telling me a couple of amateurs outsmarted our entire network because of some rocks?" He knew better. There was a mind at work here, a brilliant, unpredictable mind. "Emily, send ground teams into the gulch. Every drone with short-range capabilities, get them in there. They can't have gone far. They'll need water supplies. They'll leave a trace." Back in the gulch, Emily was leading them with an almost supernatural sense of direction. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her eyes constantly sweeping the canyon floor, her ears attuned to the desert's subtle whispers. They moved like ghosts, sticking to the deepest shadows, using ancient rock formations as cover, and pausing frequently to listen. The silence of the desert was profound, broken only by the crunch of their boots on loose shale and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. Sarah, moving behind Emily, felt a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. Every shadow seemed to hide an enemy. Every gust of wind sounded like an approaching vehicle. Yet, with Emily guiding them, there was a flicker of hope she hadn't felt in days. This wasn't a desperate flight. It was a calculated evasion, a chess match played on the grand, unforgiving board of the desert. Michael, bringing up the rear, his senses on high alert, marveled at Emily's transformation. The quiet, unassuming tech expert was now a seasoned survivalist, navigating the treacherous terrain with an innate intuition. He remembered her earlier words about being off-grid her whole life, and now he understood. This desert, with its hidden dangers and vast emptiness, was her element, a place where her unique skills truly shone. As the sun began to paint the eastern sky with hues of orange and purple, they found a small, hidden alcove, barely large enough for the three of them to huddle together. Exhaustion weighed heavily on them, but sleep was a luxury they couldn't afford. Emily pulled out a small, filtered water bottle and passed it around, each taking a meager sip. "They'll be sending search parties into the canyon now," Emily whispered, her voice hoarse. "We have to be absolutely still, blend in with the rocks. Any movement, any heat signature, and it's over." They spent the day pressed against the cool rock, the sun beating down mercilessly, turning the canyon into a furnace. Sarah felt the dehydration setting in, her throat raw, her head throbbing. Michael, ever vigilant, scanned the sky, but the canyon walls were too high, too narrow for them to see anything beyond a sliver of blue. They were trapped, hidden, but also utterly exposed to the elements. Just before dusk, a faint, rhythmic thumping sound echoed through the canyon. A helicopter. It wasn't directly overhead, but it was close, its rotors chopping at the air, sending vibrations through the rock. Their hearts pounded in unison. They knew it was the syndicate. "They're doing low-altitude passes," Emily murmured, her eyes closed, listening intently, trying to pick up any heat signatures, any movement. The helicopter passed, its sound fading, only to return minutes later, closer this time. It was methodically sweeping the canyon, inch by agonizing inch. Each pass felt like a brush with death. Sarah held her breath, trying to slow her heart rate, to become one with the stone. Michael gripped the small, scavenged knife he'd found, ready for a fight he knew he couldn't win. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the thumping faded completely, replaced by the desert's returning silence. They waited for another hour just to be sure, before Emily signaled it was safe to move. "They'll be back," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But we bought ourselves some time. We need to push harder tonight." They continued their relentless trek through the night, guided by the stars and Emily's uncanny sense of direction. The terrain grew more challenging with steep climbs and treacherous descents. Michael, despite his fatigue, took the lead on the trickier sections, offering Sarah a steady hand, ensuring Emily, focused on navigation, didn't stumble. By the dawn of the second day, they were deep within the heart of the gulch, their bodies screaming in protest, but their resolve unbroken. They found another small, hidden cave, deeper this time, offering better concealment. As they rested, Emily pulled out her tablet again, her fingers flying across the screen. "I'm trying to establish a very low-power burst connection," she explained, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Just enough to confirm the seismology station is still viable, and to see if the cache is intact." A few tense moments passed. Then, a small green indicator flickered on her screen. A faint smile touched her lips. "It's there," she breathed, relief washing over her face. "The station is still standing. And the cache, it seems undisturbed." Sarah let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank goodness." "But there's something else," Emily said, her expression turning serious again. "My brief scan picked up a faint intermittent signal. A tracking beacon. It's not ours, and it's not from the Syndicate's standard fleet. It's older, and it's moving towards us slowly from the north." Michael's eyes narrowed. "Another party? Who?" Emily shook her head. "I don't know. The signature is unusual. It's not military, not law enforcement, and definitely not the Syndicate's usual tech. It's almost like a ghost signal, but it's real, and it's getting closer to our projected path to the station." The revelation added a new layer of dread to their already perilous journey. They were no longer just evading the Syndicate. Now an unknown, potentially hostile entity was also converging on their position, heading for the very sanctuary they sought. This Hail Mary was proving to be even more dangerous than they had imagined. Their every step was a gamble, their every decision a fight for survival against a looming, unseen threat. The desert, once their shield, was now a funnel, drawing them closer to not one, but two deadly forces. Their only hope was to reach that forgotten station, to secure Emily's cache, and to finally turn the tables on those who hunted them, before they became just another forgotten casualty in the vast, unforgiving expanse. The desolate skeleton of the old Union Pacific station loomed, a decaying monument to a forgotten era. Moonlight, thin and spectral, filtered through shattered windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the frigid air. David and Jessica stumbled into its cavernous interior, their breath pluming white, their bodies aching, but their resolve sharpened by the imminent threat. The silence inside was heavy, broken only by the drip of water somewhere in the distance and the frantic drumming of their own hearts. This was it. The end of the line one way or another. Emily's instructions had been maddeningly vague. A series of cryptic phrases etched into the margins of an old, discarded train schedule she'd left in David's apartment. Where tracks converge and shadows lengthen, find the ghost of departure, beneath the iron's rust. Jessica, with her sharp mind, had deciphered it on their harrowing journey. It pointed to an old luggage locker, number 313, nestled deep within the abandoned station's forgotten storage room. They moved through the station like phantoms, their footsteps echoing, each creak of the floorboards a potential betrayer. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of damp concrete and decay. Finally, they located the storage room, a forgotten corner choked with cobwebs and defunct machinery. And there it was, a wall of rusted metal lockers, each one a relic. Jessica's eyes scanned, found 313, and with a grim determination, she pried the ancient lock open using a discarded metal bar. Inside, nestled amongst layers of ancient newspapers, was a small ruggedized pelican case. It was heavy, sealed tight. David's hands trembled as he opened it. Within, a single state-of-the-art satellite uplink device, a hardened laptop, and a stack of encrypted solid-state drives glowed faintly in the dim light. This was Emily's cache. This was their leverage. Before they could even fully process the discovery, a distinct metallic click echoed from the main hall, a sound that wasn't part of the station's natural decay. David's head snapped up. Jessica's hand flew to her sidearm, her eyes narrowing. He was here. Michael. He hadn't just tracked them. He had anticipated their destination, perhaps knowing Emily's meticulous planning better than they did. A figure emerged from the shadows, silhouetted against the faint moonlight from the entrance. It was Michael, his posture predatory, a chilling smile playing on his lips. He held a silenced pistol, its barrel glinting faintly. "Took you long enough," he drawled, his voice a low rumble that seemed to absorb the silence around them. Emily always did have a flair for the dramatic, leaving breadcrumbs. A fatal flaw in my opinion. "You knew about this place?" Jessica asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Emily and we had a history," Michael replied, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "She was a ghost in the machine, and I was the one tasked with making sure she stayed that way. She had a habit of leaving contingency plans. This station was one of her old drop points. I just had to wait." David clutched the pelican case tighter, his mind racing. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about Emily's legacy. "What do you want, Michael?" "The cash, of course," he said, gesturing with the pistol. "And then you two disappear. Quietly. No loose ends." Suddenly, the air filled with the distinct sound of multiple footsteps, heavier, more disciplined than Michael's. Not just one set, but several. From the station's opposite end, a group of figures in dark tactical gear emerged, their faces obscured by balaclavas. The organization. They had arrived, drawn by Michael's presence, or perhaps their own sophisticated tracking of Emily's old network. David and Jessica were trapped between two converging threats. Michael's smile vanished, replaced by a snarl. "Damn it," he muttered, glancing at the newcomers. "Looks like the dogs caught the scent." He raised his pistol, not at David or Jessica, but at the approaching operatives. "This is my score." A chaotic firefight erupted. Muffled shots punctuated the air as Michael, a whirlwind of trained violence, engaged the organization's operatives. He was outnumbered but brutally efficient, moving with a fluid grace that spoke of years of lethal combat. David and Jessica, caught in the crossfire, ducked behind an overturned baggage cart, the pelican case still clutched firmly in David's grip. "We have to get this data out," David urged, his voice strained over the gunfire. "This is Emily's last stand." Jessica nodded, her eyes scanning the room, assessing their limited options. "The satellite uplink. It's our only chance. But we need a clear signal and we need time." She pulled out a small specialized data stick from her tactical vest. "This is a secure conduit Emily set up, a dead man's switch. If she ever went silent, this would activate and release everything. I just need to plug it into the laptop and connect to the uplink." As Michael traded fire with the organization's men, creating a momentary distraction, Jessica scrambled to open the laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing layers of encryption Emily had painstakingly built. David watched, his heart pounding, as she inserted the data stick. A series of progress bars appeared on the screen, rapidly filling. "It's connecting," Jessica whispered, her eyes fixed on the screen. "It's initiating the broadcast." Emily's final message, her proof, it's going out to every secure channel she cultivated. News agencies, international law enforcement, whistleblower sites everywhere. A sudden lull in the gunfire. Michael, breathing heavily, had taken down 2 of the operatives, but another had managed to wound him, a crimson stain spreading across his shoulder. He staggered, but his eyes, still filled with cold fury, locked onto David and Jessica. He saw the glowing screen of the laptop, the progress bars nearing completion. He understood. "No!" Michael roared, abandoning the remaining operatives and lunging towards them. A desperate, feral charge. "You don't get to undo everything." David, fueled by a surge of adrenaline, met him head-on. He wasn't a trained fighter, but he was fighting for his life, for Emily, for justice. He swung the heavy pelican case, connecting with Michael's jaw with a sickening thud. Michael reeled back, momentarily stunned. Jessica, seeing her opening, kicked out, catching him in the knee. He collapsed to one knee, grunting in pain, but quickly tried to regain his footing, his pistol raised. Just as Michael was about to fire, a shot rang out, not from his gun, but from behind him. One of the surviving organization operatives, seeing Michael as a rogue element and a liability, had taken the opportunity. The bullet struck Michael squarely in the chest. He gasped, a look of surprise and betrayal flashing across his face, before he crumpled to the ground, his eyes wide and vacant. His reign of terror was over, but the danger wasn't. The remaining operatives, now focused solely on the laptop, converged on David and Jessica. The progress bar on the screen blared. 100% complete. Data release initiated. "It's out!" Jessica yelled, triumph and relief warring in her voice. "The world knows." The operatives, realizing their mission was compromised, their organization exposed, turned their attention from retrieval to elimination. They opened fire, a desperate attempt to silence the messengers. David and Jessica, their purpose fulfilled, had to escape. They bolted, weaving through the labyrinthine corridors of the old station, the operatives hot on their heels. Shots ricocheted around them, splintering wood and tearing through metal. They reached a forgotten service tunnel, a dark maw leading away from the station's main structure. Without hesitation, they plunged into its depths, the sounds of pursuit slowly fading behind them as they ran towards an uncertain freedom. In the days that followed, the world erupted. Emily's meticulously compiled data, a digital avalanche of irrefutable evidence, hit every major news outlet and law enforcement agency across the globe. The organization, a shadowy entity that had operated with impunity for years, was exposed in horrifying detail. Names of high-ranking officials, corrupt politicians, and ruthless operatives flooded the airwaves. Their systematic use of counterfeit identities, their intricate web of framing innocent individuals, their assassinations, and their global network of illicit activities were laid bare for all to see. Arrests swept across continents, a tidal wave of justice washing over the corrupt foundations of the organization. David's name was among the first to be publicly cleared. The evidence Emily had collected not only proved his innocence but meticulously detailed how he had been framed, down to the last forged document and planted evidence. His old life, shattered and stolen, slowly began to piece itself back together. Jessica, despite having gone rogue, was hailed as a hero. Her bravery, her unwavering commitment to justice, and her instrumental role in releasing Emily's cache earned her commendation, not condemnation. She had risked everything, her career, her freedom, her life, to see the truth prevail. Months later, David sat on a park bench watching children play, a scene of ordinary life he once thought he'd never see again. A shadow fell over him. "Jessica." She sat beside him, a quiet smile on her face. "The last of the major players were arrested this morning," she said softly. "The organization is effectively dismantled." David nodded, a profound sense of peace settling over him. "It's over. For now," Jessica replied, her gaze distant. "But there's always another shadow, David. Always another fight." Emily knew that. She fought until her last breath. "She saved me," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "She gave me back my life." Jessica reached out, briefly touching his arm. "She saved a lot of lives, David. And so did you. You carried her torch." He looked at her, truly looked at her. The woman who had believed him when no one else would, who had risked everything, becoming his unlikely ally, his fierce protector. Their journey had been a crucible, forging a bond that transcended the terror and the chaos. "What about you?" he asked. "What's next?" Jessica smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile. "The Bureau offered me a new position. Special investigations. More freedom to chase those shadows." Her eyes twinkled. "Who knows? Maybe I'll need an expert consultant on identity theft and international conspiracies." David chuckled, a genuine laugh that felt alien and wonderful after so long. The scars of his ordeal would forever remain, etched into his memory, but the heavy burden of the counterfeit identity, the false life, had been lifted. He had found his true self again, not through forgetting but through fighting, through enduring, and through the unwavering belief in truth. The case was closed, the identities restored, and the vast, unforgiving expanse that had threatened to swallow them whole now felt like a horizon of endless possibility.